today I accepted really with great enthusiasm to participate to this summer school. And when I start to prepare my lecture, I was a little bit worried about what to say, because well, I'm as Gaia introduced me, I am a botanist, a conservation biologist, and so I was a little bit concerned on the topic that I could face in my lecture with architect. Then I start to think, and I found really many contact points, and at the end I have to reduce and to cut my presentation because I have too much input. As I said, I am a botanist. I used to work in natural and agricultural system, natural environments and agricultural areas. But I think that I can put some of the experience that I learned from natural habitat also in planning new urban cities. And so I start with some consideration. Okay, I would like to start with one consideration, that if you walk in our cities and you look upward, you can see really many rooftop or balcony with many plants, like a sort of urban jungle. And I think that the pandemic crisis has increased our need of green in the cities, even if this trend started probably a few times ago. And one of the most clear example, and probably something that became a sort of symbol of green, new green architecture, is the vertical forest in Milan by Stefano Boeri, that is become a symbol of Milan and of green in our cities. But this trend was already clear looking at probably most prestigious and most expensive apartment in our cities, as looking and searching in the web some picture for this presentation. I found this wonderful view of Central Park in New York, and this very prestigious apartment have a nice rooftop with a fantastic view on Central Park. So my consideration was that we want to live in smart cities, in apartment with all the comfort and services, in the downtown, close to all the services, but we would like to live also close to green areas. We want to have a nice view on green areas. And even if this seems sort of no sense, I think that it has a sense, really, because when I look to this picture of the Central Park, if I remove all the skyscrapes, immediately comes to my mind one of the probably most powerful and energetic image that I ever seen in my life. That is the jungle of Tikal in Guatemala. This is a sort of green sea. And this view, the view of green, transmits a sort of sense of power or sense of ility. And this power of the nature was already taken into consideration by Japanese with their Shinrin Yoku, that is a sort of therapy consisting in walking in the forest, and they call forest bathing. And this therapy that was developed in Japan during the 80s became a sort of cornerstone of the healthcare system of Japanese, because several studies demonstrated that the bath in the forest reduce the blood pressure, reduce the stress hormone that is the cortisol, reduce anger, anxiety, depression. And so it is clear that the contact with nature, with green, have positive effects on our body and on our brain. But let's go back to the topic that are the cities. And today in my presentation, I'd like to to address some point, like, for example, the informal green spaces in urban areas. And because I think that usually architects, maybe it's my opinion, maybe it's wrong, but I think that usually architects look at abandoned areas or brownfield in the cities as something to rezone, to redevelop. And I would like to try to give you a different point of view, the point of view of a botanist, of who work with nature and with plants. Then I would like to briefly mention the importance of the healthy peri-urban areas, the agroecosystem close to the cities. Tell you a story of success conservation biodiversity in a urban areas, and then address the topic of native species and non-native species, the low maintenance garden versus the high input gardens, try to introduce a sort of not only mine vision, but the vision on landscape, probably where the landscape is moving to project and to design new green spaces and garden in urban areas. Just a footnote: I studied in Milan and in Pavia, so many of the examples and many of the activities that I carried out was done in Pavia and Milan, and so many of the examples that I will provide during my presentation will come from the surrounding areas of Pavia and Milan. And these pictures, I take this picture in Milan, in the southern part of Milan, in a railway areas, and this is what we can define informal green space. Informal green space consists of any urban space with a strong anthropogenic disturbance that is at least partly covered by spontaneous and non-remnant vegetation, and is not formally recognized by governing institution or property owners as a green space, because it's not designated for agriculture, for forestry, for gardening, for recreation activities, or for any environmental protection, but they exist and they are really abundant in our cities. And unlike the formal green spaces like urban park or gardens or conservation areas that are usually driven by management and the ecology, these informal green spaces are mainly driven by human origin and a particular ecology that is present in this area. Here we can see some photographs taken by some publication that define this kind of green spaces, and you can see on the upper left street verge covered by herbal vegetation, or residential lot that have been restricted to access, that develop in green areas, like gap between building or railway areas, or industrial abandoned areas, or riverside spontaneous vegetation, or also a vegetation that grows on the walls or on the crack of the street. And plants are able to colonize really all the spaces, and so urban green space represents novel ecosystem that may be suitable maybe for some species, especially common and widespread species, but not only, as we will see later. The first example that I will show you is a project that to whom I participated a few years ago, so-called Rotaie Verdi in Italian, so green railways. And the main aim of this project was to create an ecological corridor inside the city of Milan from west to east, using the railway line as a connection. And this is only a feasibility study, so we study what at the moment was present in that area, we studied the biodiversity of the area, and we propose some solutions that probably will be never accepted, but it was, I think, a useful exercise to understand how biodiversity can live and can live, yes, in the city. This is the map of the city of Milan, and the area that we studied was in the lower part. Here we have the San Cristoforo rail yard, a railway line that connects the yard of San Cristoforo with Porta Romana yard. And also from the, as you can see from the lower picture, there are several connections with green spaces in peri-urban areas. And these two, those are the map of the two rail yards. And as you can see, they are still active because there is still a line that is a rail line that is still active, but there are also many green spaces that are completely abandoned. And those are some of the pictures that have been taken along the railway line and between the two rail yards, in the two stations. And what we have done is a census of the biodiversity, not only plants, but also animals, and so invertebrates and birds and mammals and reptiles. And the results that we find was quite surprising, because we have found more than 350 species of plants in this small space of the city. That represents around the 80% of all the species that have been reported for the city of Milan, including this species that was reported for the first time in Europe, so a new alien species for Europe that was never recorded. It was Lycopus lucidus, that is a plant growing in South Korea, China, and Russia, that was never reported in Europe, that grow with a big population inside the Porta Romana yard. But what's surprising also for the number of animals that we observe along the railway line. So we found more than 60 species of insects, including butterflies, beetles, spiders, and so on, and a colony of green toads, so Bufo viridis, that choose the water tank as an ideal place for reproduction, and reptiles, different species reptiles like lizard, gecko, snakes, more than 50 species of birds, and different species of mammals. So that means that even inside and close to the railway line, there is life, there is animals, there are animals and plants that can survive and that can spread maybe in the cities. As I said, this was only a feasibility study, but we propose some solutions in order to plan more sustainable urban greening also in this area, because those are areas that are planned to be rezoned in the next future, especially for the next Olympic Games of 2026 that will be hosted in Milan. Probably our solution will not be considered, but in our idea, the two yards should become a sort of oasis park with more sustainable kind of green, and the railway line between the two parks that is not accessible to the public because it's still in use should represent a sort of connection, ecological connection between these two oases. And we propose also some solution to overcome problems like railway bridge and create a sort of continuous green connection, at least with herbaceous species along the railway, as you can see from those rendering. As I said, this was a feasibility study, but this demonstrates that also inside our city, inside these informal green spaces, we can find a lot of biodiversity. And if we look to these green spaces with the view of naturalist, we can say that in our city there is still a quite high number of species and quite good diversity. Probably also because, as I told you, there is a good connection with peri-urban areas, and so agricultural areas that are just surrounding the city of Milan. And these areas allow species, animal and plants to break in some way into the city and to maintain also the genetic flows of those populations that result maybe isolated in these green spaces. And so the second important topic is the importance of a healthy agroecosystem close to the city. There are several reasons that sustain the use of and the presence of healthy agroecosystem around our cities. For example, farmland within the peri-urban areas can be understood as part of the green infrastructure that serves and provide ecosystem services to the city, and benefit then to urban population. The more simple things is that they provide food to us, but also they can act, for example, providing collateral benefits like regulating services like cleaning of sewages or hydrological regulation, but also some cultural and recreational services. For example, farm can give well, food. Farm, the so-called farm to fork or farm to table food can be provided by this farmland just around the cities. But this farm can provide also some deductive and training activities for the children, but not only. Sometimes maybe adults needs more training activities on nature and farmland than children. And peri-urban areas can also use and conserve and valorize some rural landscape heritage. In the right picture, there is a particular kind of meadows that is called marchita. The marchite are ancient techniques that have been developed by monks in Lombardy region more than around 1,000 years ago. And there are only very few portion of marchite that still are active in the surrounding of Milano and Pavia, and they are still used by few farmers that produce a very good food for cow. But the main problem is that this green grass produced by the meadows produce a very yellow milk, and this yellow milk is not consumed by the industry that produce milk because it's not white and is yellow. And so this is a sort of problem for the people that use this kind of grass. But if we reduce the food chain, if this farmer produce maybe some cheese with this kind of milk, people from the city can help in buying this kind of cheese and can help to maintain this cultural and agricultural heritage. So this is just an example, but there are many ecosystem services that are provided by the healthy agricultural areas that surround our cities. Another point is that even if seems to be quite strange, inside our cities can live rare, threatened, and endemic species that find maybe some strange but suitable growing site inside the city. This is the case of this Mattiola crassifolia, that is a Lebanese endemic species that is restricted to very few locations along the highly urbanized Lebanese coast close to Beirut. And this is the case of another plant that is the story that I would like to tell you, that is this Hierachum australe. Hieracium is a very widespread genus that belongs to the sunflower family, the Asteraceae family. It is closely related to dandelion and chicory and represented by more than 10,000 species and subspecies. Since most of the Hieracium reproduce in a strange way, asexually by means of seeds, this means that all the new plants are identical to mother plants. They reproduce in a way that is called apomixy. And so even for botanists, it's very difficult to distinguish different plants. But there is one of these Hieracium that is endemic to the city of Milan and grows only on the walls of the Sforza castle. It was described in the second half of the 19th century by a Swedish botanist, and then was forgotten, almost forgotten for around more than 100 years, rediscovered in 2011 by some botanists of the Museum of Milan. And unfortunately, in 2015, due to Expo, the administration of Milan decided to clean the wall of the Sforza castle, also with chemicals, in order to have a nicest view of this castle without vegetation. But this causes the drastic reduction of the individuals of the species. And in 2016, we were able to find only 4 plants, so 4 individuals of these narrow endemic species. So we decided to collect some of the seeds, reproduce the plants, and reinforce the low number of individuals that have been found here, putting some of these small plants in the crack between the brick of the walls. And I have to say that this was quite a successful intervention because after 5 years, we can see that many of the plants that we introduced was healthy, was flowering, and we fenced also the upper part of the walls, as you can see from the picture. And so no one can collect plants from the garden, the Sempione garden that is just close to the castle. And in this way, more than 60 plants were counted this year. So this is the story of a successful conservation action carried out in a place that probably no one would think that a rare or threatened species could grow, the downtown of a big city. So this is a strange probably situation, but I think I'm quite sure that in many of the other cities of the world, there are interesting species, interesting from a conservation point of view. And so I think that it's important to involve local administration and public in order to create awareness on the importance of the conservation of species. As you can understand from this story, not all the species are the same. And so we go through the next part of the presentation. And as I tell you, not all the species are the same, even if sometimes appear to be the same. This is a case quite dangerous, because I also teach forensic science in a master course, and plants could be very dangerous, could be used also as a murder weapon. And those are two that seems to be two innocent plants. The one in the lower part of the screen is Crocus sativus, the plants that produce the saffron, and the one in the upper part is Colchicum autumnale, a very poisonous and dangerous plant. They seem very similar. If you are not expert, you can exchange one with the other, and this is a great problem because sometimes people collect plants without knowledge, and almost every year in the journal reported cases of people that died or have been poisoned by poisonous plants. So not all the plants are equal, not all the plants are the same. All the plants differ for several characteristics, and I think that the role of botanists is getting more important also to make understand people that not all the plants are the same. Probably who work with landscape architecture in some ways know that not all the people, the plants differ. They can differ from their habit. We have trees or herbaceo species from their ecological requirement, because we can have plants that require shadow, plants that require light, humid environments versus drylands, or plants that have very nice flower, with this one on the left, versus plants that have insignificant flowers, but these have a biological meaning. The nice flower have to attract pollinators. The flower on the right disperse their pollen with the wind, so don't need to attract any animals. And the impact also of the single species, of the single plant species on the network that can sustain is different, because plants with nice flower can sustain ecological network of pollinator, and pollinator can be used by other animals as prey. So it's important to know different species to understand the importance and the role of the different species inside the plant community. And so here we arrive to the another important topic that is one of the most probably important topic that is creating problems to conservation of biodiversity, that is the invasion of non-native or so-called alien species. On the left, we have common oak, that is a native species in Europe. And on the left, we have the tree of heaven, the Ailanthus altissima, that is a native species in China, but is an alien and invasive species in Italy or in other parts of Europe. So the non-native or non-indigenous species are those species that do not occur naturally in an area, but have been introduced as a result of the human activities. And this introduction could be deliberate or accidental. Some of these non-native species can live without problem in a new environment. Other create great problem, and those that create economic and environmental problem are the invasive species. And here we can see some example. Probably some of you already know the Asian tiger mosquito that arrived from China, or this is the nutria or the water lily and the water hyacinth. They both arrived from South America to Europe, but also some European species like the bamboo reed create problem in other parts of the world. So which kind of problem create those species? Here you can see, for example, an infestation of this Cytios angulatus that completely shade the native community and prevent the growth of all the other species. And one of the main introduction path of these species to new habitat is the ornamental use. So we use these plants because they have a nice flower, because they have a nice shape, a nice color, but sometimes these plants escape from cultivation and colonize all the surrounding area, creating a great problem to the ecosystem, maybe not to urban ecosystem, even if sometimes, for example, Ailanthus altissima create also problem to human manufacture or to railway line. And so there is also an important economic value, an important economic impact of those species. Other times happens that species that naturally grow in completely different parts of the world came in contact due to the cultivation of human. This is the case, for example, of Reinutria japonica and Reinutria sakhalinensis. They are two species, one's growing in Japan, the other in the Sakhalin Island in northern part of Japan and Russia, but they have been separated by the evolution by the sea, during the evolution by the sea. And someone take these two plants and grow together in a garden in England. And these two plants, they can reproduce, they can hybridize themselves and create a new hybrid that was described for the first time in Czech Republic. So it's called Reinutria bohemica, that have a stronger invasive impact than the other two because it's bigger and more vigorous and more invasive than the two Reinutria. So we cannot control really what we do with plants sometimes. And in our city in the past, but also nowadays, we make large use of non-native species in urban greening. Usually because we look mostly at the aesthetic characteristic, then we not take into consideration the ecological or the biological impact. And sometimes we also go against, we contravene to European national or regional legislation because there are some laws that regulate the use of native, of non-native species in urban spaces and in gardening. And we have to control this kind of laws. There are a sort of blacklist, so species that cannot be used, because many studies have demonstrated that there is a negative influence of the non-native species, even in the urban environment and the urban ecosystem. In this study, for example, the researcher investigated in England the impact of native and non-native trees on a community of insects, in particular Hemiptera and insectivorous bird, Paridae. And they demonstrated that the proportion of native trees was positively correlated, as you can see from the graph, to the abundance of Hemiptera and Paridae. In another more recent studies in the United States, they demonstrated that the residential yard dominated by non-native plants had a lower abundance of arthropods, and these negatively reflect on the capacity of these small birds, Carolina cicadas, to reproduce. So this led to lower reproduction, success, unsustainable population growth, and a decrease in the number of these birds in the city where non-native trees have been used. So to promote sustainable food webs, urban planners and also private landowners in some cases should prioritize the native plant species. Even if a more recent study published last year, demonstrated that the pollinator networks that interact with the plant change during the season. And these seasonal changes is quite important. This study was done in Germany. And as you can see, over the course of the season, the visit to native plants that are represented by the gray arrow decreased, and the proportion of flower visited by pollinators, the proportion of alien flower visited by pollinator, represented by the red arrows, increased at the end of the summer, at the end of the season. So this demonstrated that during the summer, where the native species usually do not flower, if we use maybe non-native, obviously not invasive species, we can increase the number and the pollination network that live in our cities. And this gives me the opportunity to arrive to the last point of my presentation, and that is the differences between low maintenance garden versus the high input garden. This is a classic English lawn, and if you look at this picture, you can see a sense of order, clean, soft. Maybe you can take your towel and have a fantastic picnic on the grass. But if I go there and make a floristic survey, I try to find different species. Probably I feel very sad because I can find, I don't know, 3, 4 species, no more probably. So personally, I don't like this kind of green, but of course it's a matter of opinion. I prefer a more natural meadows, but you can argue that, okay, this is a natural meadows, we cannot use this kind of meadows in our cities. It's only partly true, because there is also some sustainable reason. I mean that English lawn require a very high input, because need to be irrigated several times a week, maybe every day. So there is a high consumption of water, need to be mowed once a week, fertilizer maybe once or twice a month. And so this type of greening is becoming more and more probably unsustainable, especially in the Mediterranean areas where the summer are very dry and hot, but probably not only. And so I think that we have to shift and we have to move to a more sustainable urban greening. Obviously, this kind of greening has some advantages and disadvantages compared to the English lawn. So if we start from the disadvantages, probably it is a matter of opinion, but this is more, give more a sense of disorder, not order. It's probably more expensive to create at the beginning, and because you need the consultant of botanist, of a landscape architect, you have to buy more species. And especially probably someone can argue that you cannot have a picnic in this kind of urban greening. But you have also many advantages, because I said that it is more expensive at the beginning, but I think that in this case is valid the logic that whatever spends more saves, because you spend a lot maybe at the beginning, but then you save time, because this kind of green do not need maintenance, or maybe only once a year. You save water, because this space do not require irrigation during the summer. They are perennial species, so they can live for more than 1 year, for several years. You can play also with the phenology of the species, and as I told you before, is important for the pollination network, so can sustain a more viable network interaction with insects, with other animals like insectivorous birds or mammals. And you can also change the color during the season if you choose the right flowering period. And so you create a positive effect on the biodiversity inside urban areas. The use also of grasses is becoming more important, I think, because even if they do not produce flower, they create this more natural situation. And so they can be widely used in the garden, also alone or in common with other species, contributing to recreate a sort of wild appearance. And this is another example of wild garden. And just to finish with some other example, with the view that I explained you in mind, we create a few years ago a company that was founded in 2012 as a spin-off university of the University of Pavia. This is not an advertisement, because I founded this company, but now I exit from the company. I'm no more part of this company. And but this company produce plants for habitat restoration, but also for urban greening, with the philosophy that I try to explain you. And so we produce, they produce really a plant for phytoremediation. This is an implant of phytoremediation for clean sewages in Mezzanabili, in province of Pavia, where many native plants were planted, or plants for the green roof. This is a green roof that was created in a new building in the area of Como Lake in Cernobbio. And the planted area is quite small, 80 square meter, around 80 square meter. But here we planted native species, and to create an alternative to the traditional green roof planting that usually use sedum, that small grass plant, small plant used for this kind of intervention. And so this planting was made all with native species found in natural habitat that are in the surrounding, and with a constant seasonal interest also. Another project was the one of the green roof of Fondazione Prada. This Fondazione Prada hosts some art collection in Milan, and here Flora Conservation produced some of the plants that have been used for the green roof, that recreate a sort of natural meadows. And the last images that I would like to show you are some of the interventions that have been carried out last year in Pavia, in the urban greening of Pavia. Pavia, as you see from the presentation, is a city that just crossed by the Ticino River. And along the Ticino riverside, there have been created these small green spaces, both with the native and ornamental species that have a constant interest in flowering during all the season, and with different color. And these kind of plants have been used not only in the Ticino riverside, but also in other parts of the city, like in Sforza Castle. Here you can see different, for example, this Allium giganteum, that is a not a native species, but is not an invasive one. So a flowering period that differ from some other species, so is of interest and have some ornamental also value. Also in Piazza della Minerva, where the idea was to recreate the riverbed of the Ticino River that is not so far. As you can see, those are the plants planted on these small stones that are exactly the same stones that you can find just few hundred meters in the Ticino River, far in the Ticino River. Or other intervention here in the Piazza Dante with grasses mixed with nice flowering species, also maybe with some allium species that have a very late flowering period, so can flower even in September or October and attract many pollinators. So just to close my presentation, some conclusion and concluding remarks. I think that some of the tips that could help in improving the biodiversity in our city and create more green and sustainable garden are to consider also the informal green spaces as a sort of source of natural biodiversity. So I know that maybe you would like to work for regenerate these spaces, but sometimes even the regeneration have to take into consideration what already exists in that area. I think that is really important to connect the urban green spaces with the peri-urban areas in order to create a connection between also population of plants and animals in order to sustain viable population of animal and plants even inside the green spaces of our city. And I think that we have to consider not only the aesthetic value of the plants, but we have also to match this aesthetic value with the ecological and the biological value of our species, in particular take into consideration the possibility to avoid non-native species, or at least to limit the use of non-native and invasive species in the urban greening. Take into consideration the use of drought-resistant species, long-flowering species, or species that are adapted to local conditions. And I think that it's important to have a sort of connection, not only from my point of view, from the point of view of botanists, but I think that it's important to share experience with architects, with designer, with engineering who works in designing the new city, and to bring our knowledge of biology and ecological requirement of species in order to design also the city, our city, in the next future. So that's all.